Yeah, how are you? I literally just finished watching the movie. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, all right, man. So we get the fresh take
It's a
right
fresh
out
take.
the gate.
Well, I'm going to begin just by asking you about this story and just how. I mean, obviously, I didn't know anything about it. Just wondering if when you read that screenplay, if you could quite believe that this is a real thing that happened.
Yeah, I know. It's funny because it's actually sad. But while making the movie, I guess like the search engines or whatever. Like once I was researching the movie, and you go down the Google search engine, suddenly I'm getting pinged with news stories about people that this is happening to. I mean, there were people last year stuck in Colorado for like 7 to 9 days, trapped in snow. Like these things happen. There's still many rural parts of the world, and with a lot of snow. So yeah, it's frightening, especially because you get broadsided by these extreme circumstances.
So, what was it that initially attracted you to this character and this project?
Well, it's a loaded question because it starts with Brendan Walsh. He approached us with the script, and of course I love the story. As an actor, you want to kind of sink your teeth into something, and the minutia, the specificity that the relationship requires, and to be able to try and find variety to keep the story interesting between the two people and how they would cope, how the conflict is. How trouble manifests for these two to really, so working with Genesis to try and establish, who the couple is, what their pregnancy's been like. And Brendan had a unique vision. He wanted to shoot this thing incredibly authentic. It was almost a throwback style of movie making. He bought two of the same cars. He parked them, he cut them in different directions so he can move the camera in different ways, and then parked them in an ice cream freezer where he was able to change the temperature. And so, the breath is real, the cold is real, and rigged plexiglass with snow and ice around the windows. So, you don't realize how small a car is until you're in one for several weeks.
Yeah, how was it driving after this? Was that
Oh man, it was it does start to it made me ask myself some questions like, am I prepared for these kinds of things? And it also informed a little bit of my COVID response because I'm like, okay, all right, like you really got to make sure you have necessary supplies, when you hunker down, and the uncertainty of the future, when things will end, when will you get out? Are we prepared for the long haul in any of these circumstances?
so? Yeah, did you find yourself kind of thinking of this character in this situation during COVID? Because I bet, and just in general, just as an actor, when you portray roles, do you ever find yourself thinking, what would that person do in this situation? Or find just even referencing them in your own day-to-day life? Or do you keep it quite separate from your personal sort of time?
Well, it's largely separate, but sometimes we're popping off all kinds of thoughts. So yeah, I mean, definitely there were things that were direct. I mean, we couldn't have imagined in August of 2019 that the world would be what it is in August of 20. So again, we were all kind of blindsided by this thing. And yeah, you start to go into modes. You start to ask yourself questions, and I was able to, just go through a checklist of like, okay, what do I do? And but it's different also because there are other people we care for, that we'd have to reach out to and make sure that they're okay during this. So
So was it? I mean, obviously, one of the things about this movie is that your character is constantly contemplating and facing his own mortality. In a situation that usually we're not in those kind of situations generally in day to day life. But I'm just wondering how about emotionally, was that quite an exhausting experience for you? Because every day you're getting into the mindset of someone who's preparing himself and readying himself for his potentially that he might not make this out alive. So I'm just wondering about how that affected you personally, and if at the end of the shoot, if you actually felt almost quite relieved to go back into your own mind again.
I think the two words you use that really kind of embody the experience is exhaustion and relief. I think those are great, like laser words for this thing. And it was progressively exhausted. And Genesis and I had conversations like, because we're shooting in orders, day 1 through 5 or 7, they're going to be challenging, and we're establishing the story, but they're not going to be what the back half of this shoot is going to be. And it's just going to get harder and harder and harder. So yeah, the second that kind of, we wrap, I do remember like just a real sense of relief, And yeah, you know, having dealing with stakes that high, even in our imagination, is an exhausting thing.
It must. I mean, it's, even though obviously you were in character, it's quite a thing to go with. A thing to go through with Genesis. I mean, you kind of went through this experience together, but through the prism of your characters, they went through something incredibly scary and unique. I just wondered what sort of bond that created between yourself and Genesis, because I guess you kind of experienced this very unique situation together.
Yeah, it was. We did have our own, you know, unique lens in which we observed it not only as the characters but as the actors, and what you know, reaching our limits at times, and because you know you're not only dealing with the cold, we were dealing with hunger as well. Both of us had agreed at the top that we would, you know, kind of pay the price and fast and diet and you know, and just try and get by and take the journey. But yeah, it was definitely, you know, I felt like Matt was certainly deep in thought about the arc of his life. You know, I guess it's a bit cliche when people go, your life flashes before your eyes before you die. But when you're potentially dying over 24 days, I don't think you could turn that movie reel off about your decision making and, you know, the wonder of it.
Yeah. And I've been trying interested because I've been on sort of movie sets before, and it's so kind of stop start. So there'll be kind of like I've been on set sometimes for like 3 or 4 days at a time where they'll be shooting on a kind of railway tracks, and then everyone up and goes. The next thing you know, we're all in a prison or we're all in a kind of in a field somewhere. And it kind of keeps things quite fresh and interesting for the cast, the crew, everyone kind of involved. But I guess you were going into the same space every single day throughout this shoot. How was that for you to keep it kind of fresh every day, to try and somehow make it feel so like new and kind of exciting for you, rather than, or actually did that kind of monotony kind of help kind of affect the performance?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I felt like I leaned into the sameness of it, leaned into the lack of preoccupation, and what people would do to try and entertain themselves or, you know, somehow occupy themselves in these tight quarters. And the sameness of it, I was hoping would resonate, um, you know, for the viewer as well. But you know, and again, that's like the paradox is you want to convey sameness without boredom. So how do you find sameness and variety, you know, in one little moment? You know, it was really a great challenge to work on this.
And you mentioned about sort of life flashing before your eyes. I think if my life flashed before my eyes, I quite like to see a life where I worked with Clint Eastwood and Martin Scorsese. But unfortunately, I haven't had that opportunity. But you have. So I just wanted to ask you about those experiences. I mean, so obviously, you know, as an actor, you're always moving from project to project, working from filmmaker to TV. And on TV series, there's a whole host of filmmakers. But specifically, working with Scorsese and Clint Eastwood, what were those experiences like to work with two of the greatest filmmakers ever?
You know, I mean, I feel spoiled rotten, and yeah, I mean, both of them, two, you know, seminal filmmakers, real titans of masters of the craft, and to learn under them, especially where I was in my career when I worked with them respectively. I felt like they had given me something that I hope to bring to every project, regardless who's directing or who that I'm acting with. But both two incredibly generous filmmakers, and a testament to know that you could reach the heights of a craft or an industry and just exude goodness and right, you know, just, you know, being spiritually correct, you know, in a way that you create such a good atmosphere for your actors and for people to create. And they both go about it in very different ways, but they're, you know, both incredibly effective. So yeah, it was a real gift for me to work with those guys.
And sort of looking back, because obviously I love Boardwalk Empire, and it's one of those shows I can just watch whenever it's kind of on. I was just wondering about yourself, because if you ever kind of flick through the sort of TV networks and you can see it's on somewhere, do you ever kind of sit back and just watch it, and now you've got a bit of distance, you can just appreciate how brilliant it was, or is it still difficult when you're a part of something?
It's still a little difficult for me. I mean, I hope one day I can look back on it. And what's crazy is someone just told me the other day that it's been 10 years since we started working on it. And I was like, oh man, like when, you start to hit those milestone dates, but yeah, I hope at some point, that I can go back and look at it and, and appreciate it. But I really live with that appreciation, like that cast and the showrunner on down, and of course, Mr. Scorcese, all of them. I mean, it was just really, it was a 5-year masterclass in, working with some great people. So I feel blessed.
By the end, were you able to call him Marty? I always feel like you've got to get to a level where you can one day just say, "Hey, Marty." Did you get to that stage?
I'm such a spaz, like I think I probably called him Marty. I probably tried on a bunch of different things. I had the same problem with Eastwood. I was like, "Can I call you?" There was a funny moment with him when I said, "Mr. E." I called him, and then Mr. Eastwood, and then I felt weird calling him Clint. And I said, "Mr. Eastwood, can I ask you a question?" And he's like, "Yeah." I was like, "What should I call you?" And there was like a grip walking by. He's like, "Hey, Barry." He goes, "What do you call me?" "Clint." "Right. And what do you call me?" "Clint." "I guess my name's Clint. You should call me Clint." And I was like, all right, fair enough. I still ended up calling him Mr. Eastwood. It was just one of those.
I once interviewed Ice Cube, and I called him Mr. Cube, and then realized it was a stage name, and I just so that was
awesome. How did he receive it?
He was like, "Just call me Ice, man," and I was like, "No, that's probably cooler than Mr. Cube." Mr. Cube sounds like a scientist or something,
Mr. Cube, man, have you? I love that.
So I was wondering too about, you sort of mentioned like lockdown. How has your lockdown been for you? Because I've interviewed so many filmmakers and actors and actresses across lockdown, and some have really used this opportunity to just take a bit of a breather, because obviously your job means you do so much traveling and stuff away from home. Have you quite enjoyed the sort of downtime at home, or have you actually been itching to get back out there and start doing more creative work again?
Kind of like the movie in a way is it's been a whole variety of things. So right out the gate, unfortunately, my parents contracted COVID, and they're both in their 70s. So I was really kind of thrust into this emergency crisis, how my brother and I can support them without being near them. So it was a very, very frightening moment, but thankfully they both made it through. I know a lot of people aren't that lucky. But we were, and they've been back and have the antibodies, and they're, doing their follow-ups to stay on top of things. But that was like the first 2 weeks of COVID. And then I think I slept for like a day just to kind of like unwind from all that tension. And then, to be honest, I felt like I was playing catch up on life. Like there was so much stuff I had to do in my house, and there's so much, there was a script I was supposed to be writing, and, so I dug into that, and it's kind of been nonstop, which is good because it gives me less time to just sit around in my head. But there are some of those days too. But yeah, it's been kind of everything. And I guess the thing that, is, can really weigh is the uncertainty of when we're going to be on the other side of this thing, and what is that going to look like?
Yeah.
How about you? You've been navigating it all okay?
Yeah, well, I think it's. I made at the beginning of I made a list. I mean, I'm very fortunate. I haven't had any personal experiences with it, but I'm sorry to hear about what you and your family have been through. But I've made a list at the beginning of COVID where I just wrote down things I wanted to kind of like accomplish, which was like learn French, learn the piano. I've done neither of those things, but I am cooking a lot. So yeah,
Same.
but I'm not being that creative. I'm using it as a bit of a breather, because I think, and also my wife, we never get to see each other because she's a lawyer, but we're both working from home, so we've quite enjoyed that kind of chance to actually spend some time together. But it's been all right for me. But I'm looking forward to life getting normal again, which leads me on to my last question. Do you think the industry could look differently after all of this has happened? Are you anticipating we might go back to a different film industry?
I think so. I feel like it's going to be transformative, and I don't think anything is going to really be spared in that. Yeah, I don't quite know how, it's going to look different, or feel different, or maybe this type of stories we tell might be different. How we conduct business might be different. Sets. I think this is a really transformative moment. How lasting that will be, I mean, like anything else, right? We go through stages and cycles. It's not like people were wearing surgical masks in 1925. It was like really reserved for the Spanish flu. So yeah, I think I think there's going to be a real moment. And you know, there was a statistical thing that came out of South Korea after SARS that like 40% of the population had polled saying that they live their life differently now, and the main difference was appreciation, more time with close friends and family. So, you know, if that's one of the byproducts of this, obviously the toll is unacceptable for any loss of life, but you know, that the other side of it might be a nice place to be.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you.
Likewise.
Yeah, and hopefully in the future, and you know, if I was gonna not if there's a Centigrade 2, but if you're working on something else in the future, hopefully we can do something like this in person.
Likewise. It would be great. It would be great.
Cool. Take care, man.
Yes, stay safe.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey, you guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yes.
Nice.